In the Bible, reading through the Gospels or the Psalms or the prophets, you've probably come across names like Hezekiah or Josiah or Jezebel and been aware that they are of some significance, but were unsure what exactly they referred to. And so, if you're like me, you've often glossed over them, assuming they're of some importance, but unsure exactly what they are referring to. Many people have a general sense of Moses leading the people out of slavery in Egypt, and of King David, and of Solomon, the wisest person ever. They have some appreciation that there was a temple that was of some importance, and a lot of important things happened in Jerusalem. So too, people may be aware of the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and others, but are unsure how exactly they fit into this history of the people of Israel, and what exactly so many of them were so upset about. In this series, we're going to explore the Kingdom of Judah, looking through the history of this kingdom from the establishment of the United Kingdom in roughly 1050 BC till its dissolution after the conquest of the Babylonians of the Kingdom of Judah in 586 BC. This roughly 500 years includes many important people, places, and events that has significance for many books of the Bible. And having a clear picture of this period of time will give greater understanding and meaning to many otherwise obscure references in the Bible. And so in this series, The Kings of Judah, in the 5 videos that follow, we'll try to present a clear picture of the history of these kings and the significant events that took place during their lifetimes. We'll also try to present a general sense of what was going on politically, socially, and internationally that affected these kingdoms at this time. And lastly, we'll try to draw out some of the themes of this time frame and see how they apply to our world today. So thanks for joining with us in our survey of the Kings of Judah. The period covered in this series is roughly 1050 to 586 BC, the duration of the Kingdom of Judah and Israel. Now, I say roughly because the dates in this time frame cannot be determined with 100% accuracy. They are arrived at by comparing the chronologies provided in the Bible and compared against external events and archaeological finds from the time. However, there are some difficulties in calculating this with complete confidence, as in the timeline provided in the Bible, it is uncertain whether there are co-regencies taking place. That is, there are 2 kings governing cooperatively at the same time. That is stated in one instance, but it's unsure if it's happening in other instances as well. It's also unclear if there are any gaps between the kingships. And also, reigns are generally given in round year figures, and so portions of years are not tabulated with precision. Furthermore, there is not an abundance of archaeological material to compare it against, especially early in this period. And so while several scholarly timelines are in use today, the chronology presented in this series will be somewhat general, and also appreciating there may be some years of variance on either side. A word should also be said about our sources, the books that provide this information about the kings of Judah. While many books derive from this time, or refer to events within this time, the 6 books that tell these histories are 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Now it should be noted that each of these sets of books were each originally one book. That is, 1st and 2nd Samuel was a single book called Samuel. 1st and 2nd Kings was Kings, and Chronicles likewise. The reason each was divided into 2 books is that they are all longer books, and when originally composed, were more conveniently fit on 2 scrolls each. For that reason, we have 2 scrolls or 2 books for each original book. In the Hebrew version of the Old Testament, however, the Tanakh, these books are combined again into single books, and so there may be some divergence in comparing references with the Hebrew Bible. Broadly speaking, the book of 1 Samuel tells the story of the establishment of the kingdom and the first king, King Saul. 2 Samuel tells the story of his successor, King David, and his exploits and difficulties. And 1st and 2nd Kings tell the story of David's son Solomon and the successor kings down to the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians in 586 BC. 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings go together in a unified, continuous history. They are meant to be read sequentially. 1st and 2nd Chronicles is a second telling of the same history. Readers are often surprised to find that much of the material is already covered in Samuel and Kings. And indeed, about 50% of the information in 1st and 2nd Chronicles is found elsewhere in the Bible. However, it is a different presentation of the same history. 1st and 2nd Chronicles was written later, after the people had returned from their captivity in Babylon. And while Samuel and Kings provide a very honest telling of both the successes and the failures of the kings of Judah, 1st and 2nd Chronicles is more positive, more hopeful, focusing more on the accomplishments and not as much on the failures, intending to give the people a brighter expectation of the future, especially looking forward to a Messiah who would deliver them. These two histories complement one another, and we draw from both to create a comprehensive picture of the kings of Judah. To understand the significance of the kingdom of Judah, however, we first have to provide a background into how it came into being. And so this will be a broad history leading up to the establishment of the kingdom. The story, of course, begins in Genesis, with the story of creation, the covenant with Abraham, and the stories of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the movement of the people of Israel to Egypt in approximately 1875 BC. The story continues in the book of Exodus, with Moses leading the people out of captivity in Egypt towards the Promised Land, beginning in approximately 1445 BC. They wander through the wilderness for 40 years, and through the books of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the law is given, the commandments of God given to the people of Israel that governs their worship and religion, their personal conduct, and their civic life. After some adventures, conflicts, and conquests in the wilderness, the people arrive on the edge of the Promised Land at 1405 BC. From there and over the next 40 years, the book of Joshua tells how Joshua and the Israelites invade and conquer the Promised Land. The book describes how some of the people in the Promised Land accept and believe in God and become part of the continued story of the Hebrew peoples. Others, however, do not, and the Israelites, under the leadership of Joshua, overcome them. The Promised Land is then divided among the 12 tribes of Israel. These are the families descending from the 12 sons of Israel, or Jacob, and each family or tribe is given a portion here in the Promised Land. After the land was settled by the Israelites, however, there was no king that governed them. Rather, God was understood to be their king. They received their law from God and expected God to protect them. However, times of crisis arose, and the book of Judges describes how in periods of difficulty, God raised up deliverers among the people to save them. These deliverers were known as rulers or judges. And the book of Judges frequently describes how God raised such and such up to deliver them in their difficulty, and the Spirit of God would often come upon them. This succession of 12 judges each appeared during times of crisis and served primarily as military leaders to lead the Israelites to victory against threatening neighboring nations. This almost always followed a period of internal decline, however, as the people of Israel had strayed from their covenant, had not lived according to the law that God had given them, primarily in worshiping gods of neighboring nations, and of extensive immoral behavior. These judges differ from kings, however, in a few important ways. Firstly, they seem to be raised up for specific situations. They are ad hoc leaders raised up to deliver the people from specific instances of difficulty. Moreover, while kings come from a certain family, the judges of ancient Israel came from a variety of tribes. And with the exception of the last judgeship, Samuel, none of the judges were hereditary. Now, while the judges were raised up for military leadership, they also served a function to judge the people. That is, while the law came from God and not from a king, judgment still needed to be made on certain circumstances. One of the judges, Deborah, is described as such in Judges 4. It reads, "Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapideth, was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the people of Israel came up to her for judgment." The people from all the tribes of Israel would seemingly come to these judges for decisions in justice. Samuel is also described as being something of a circuit judge. He is described in 1 Samuel 7. Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life, and he went on a circuit year by year to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, and he judged Israel in all these places. Then he would come back to Ramah, for his home was there, and there also he administered justice to Israel. And so for roughly 300 years, the Israelites in the Promised Land were ruled by these judges, who were raised up by God to be a military leader in times of crisis, and also served as judges to render judgments for the people. However, as the book of Judges shows, this went less and less well as time went by. The people all did what was right in their own eyes, and the judges themselves progressively became more and more corrupt. After a series of cycles of difficulties and even warfare between the tribes of Israel, the people finally clamored to have a king. Even though Samuel, the last prophet judge, warns them that a king will oppress them, will take their crops, their fields, their sons, their servants, nonetheless, the people insist on having a king like the other nations to govern them and to lead them in battle. And so it is at this time, at 1050 BC, that Samuel, after praying to God, relents and anoints the first king of all the tribes of Israel, King Saul. And the story of King Saul is where we will pick up in our next video. But thank you for joining with us in this background overview of the kingdom of Judah, and may God bless you today.